This is Old Moor Wetland in the heart of the Dearne Valley. It's bordered by the River Dearne itself and, among other things, acts as a flood defence system for the surrounding low-lying land. But this is the story of a dramatic transformation. The reclamation of the Manvs main colliery coal storage yards and coking plant to become a wetland nature reserve and one of the finest in the north of England. Such was the importance of the Manvs main colliery in the Second World War, it was protected from enemy bombers by a squadron of barrage balloons, and 2 years' supply of coal was stored on nearby farmland in case the mine was bombed. This practice continued after the war. After the colliery closed in 1990, Manvs had the dubious distinction of being the largest single area of derelict land in Europe. Much of the site was heavily contaminated by toxic byproducts of coal. At its centre was the Manvs main colliery complex. Next to it lay a vast coking plant. West of that were the marshalling yards and 36 miles of track. 5,000 coal wagons from nearby mines were sorted daily and dispatched to all parts of the country. Before the mine shafts were sunk, this was farmland, and an 18th century farmhouse still stands on the site. Nearby was a stretch of water named Wolfings. Despite its proximity to the Manvs colliery, this had been a local nature and birdwatching site for many years. The Ings was formed in the 1920s when a mine shaft collapsed and caused the ground to sink and then fill up with water. There are similar features at nearby Wumwell and Broomhill. The old farmhouse and outbuildings are now part of a thriving commercial and residential area. They are the administrative hub of a 250-acre wetland nature reserve run by the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, usually known as the RSPB. We'll now begin telling you how this massive transformation came about. The story really begins in 1990, when the officers at Barnsley and Rotherham councils were discussing the reclamation of the Manvs site, which fell across both boundaries, so it gave them a big problem. Roger Mitchell of Rotherham Council floated the visionary idea of getting the soil from Old Moor, while at the same time creating a new wetland. But making this vision happen required a lot of imagination, courage and perseverance from Roger and his Barnsley colleague Eric Bennett. Eric managed the project from the Barnsley side and was responsible for the planning and design of Old Moor and overseeing its construction. Achieving the vision also required a lot of money, far beyond the reach of the local authorities. At about this time, the Dearne Valley Partnership was formed, a new way of local authorities working with the private sector, government agencies and communities. In 1991, the partnership was successful in bidding for City Challenge funding, a new government initiative to regenerate rundown areas. A vital component of its 5-year plan was the reclamation of the Manvs site for housing and commercial use. Also, a new nature reserve at Old Moor was planned. Besides City Challenge, another important source of funding was a new European programme targeted at coalfield areas. Barnsley Council had played a prominent role in lobbying for this. After extensive surveys, other preparatory work and land acquisition, construction began in 1995 with funding from the City Challenge, other UK government funds and from Europe. It was always intended that the reserve would be run by a trust, but finding one was not easy. The Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust withdrew in 1994 and the RSPB turned down the opportunity in 1997. Word got around about this exciting new development, and at its unofficial opening in September 1998, 1,500 people toured the site. The official opening was in 1999 and the RSPB took over the reserve in 2003. Old Moor Wetland lies between Barnsley and Rotherham in a semi-urban setting, a stone's throw away from a busy new business park, and near to the built-up area known as Brampton, Wath-on-Dearne and Bolton-on-Dearne. Not the most promising location, you might think, for a nature reserve. But once visitors go through the gates of Old Moor, they enter a different world, one that is quiet, calm, with open water, islands and wader scrapes. Wet grassland, meadows and woodland. A world that is a rich ecosystem, abundant with wildlife. Old Moor is a birdwatcher's paradise, as you might expect from one of the RSPB's flagship reserves in the north of England. Everything has been done to encourage as many species of birds as possible. For example, the reserve has been carefully designed so that visitors don't disturb them. Take this hide for example. It allows visitors to see the birds without the birds being able to see them. There are 7 more around the reserve looking out over the open water and the reed beds. And these well-maintained paths are screened from the water by steep banks which hide the people using them. Reed beds are managed to provide a mix of open water, wet reed and drier fen hedges. New channels and pools are being created to help bitterns forage for food. Bitterns are a great success story at Old Moor and other RSPB reservations. They're shy birds, more likely to be heard than seen. The booming voice of a male can be heard for miles. Reed beds were laid down to attract them, and in 2012 bitterns nested at the Old Moor site for the first time. The water levels are carefully regulated. In spring they're lowered to reveal the mud which wader chicks need in order to feed. In the winter they're raised to encourage wildfowl. The grassland gets grazed to the right height and thickness to retain moisture, which is great for insects and larvae, and also for the birds who feed on them. Old Moor's varied habitats attract a wide variety of birds. In addition to the resident species, thousands of other birds use it as a feeding stop on their migrations. Here's a list of what's been recorded so far today. It adds up to 27 different species, which is pretty impressive if you ask me. At different times of year, out on the water or resting in the reeds or on the banks, you will find ducks, geese, gulls and swans. You will see waders, birds of prey and numerous finches, tits and other small birds. Apart from bitterns, the cultivation of the reed beds has brought another rare breeding species. The bearded tit. Among the many species of duck to be found at Old Moor are widgeon, golden eye, and the very rare pintail. Nesting boxes have helped to establish a colony of the uncommon tree sparrow, though recently they've gone missing. The feeding tables overlooked from the visitor centre are constantly visited by finches, tits and other small birds, except when you want to film them, of course. If you go into the visitor centre at Old Moor, you will immediately meet RSPB volunteers. They are receptionists, guides and advisors. They work to maintain the site and its habitats, and to record birds and other wildlife. All the RSPB reserves depend on volunteers who are all local people who support the RSPB's work on behalf of nature. Volunteers make a vital contribution, though this is often overlooked. So, I spoke to a couple of them to find out what their efforts entailed. It's a nice day out here and nice to come to a place like this. I can see why you volunteer, but why don't you give me your story of the volunteering? What do you do?
So I volunteer a lot with the visitor side of it. So I volunteer welcoming guests, visitors to the reserve. I also volunteer in the shop. And it's just great just to talk to people and talk to them about nature and what's on the reserve, and introduce them to Old Moor on the front desk, welcoming people to the reserve. Or I can be out actually on the reserve helping families with what they're doing on the reserve. So this could be pond dipping, this could be bird watching, so any activities that they need help.
Is it the same with UK? Because you're here under slightly different circumstances, aren't you?
Yeah, it's a bit different. So I work mostly with the wardening team, and a lot of the work that I do is sort of the hands-on habitat management. So I'll be out in the reserve tackling different areas, and then I do also help out a bit on the visitor side, but mostly on what we call community engagement, and you'll have sort of little trails going through the reserve where we have activities planned for.
And of course visitors. They need somebody from here to go with them, don't they? Yeah. Is it a tiring sort of job?
For me it's physically tiring because it is really physical type of work, but I get a lot of satisfaction out of it, so it's good.
So, it's called Old Moor. What do you think the future is like for it? Has it got a future as a nature reserve?
Definitely. It's so popular with visitors and everybody that comes. The birders love it, and there's lots of work going on to maintain the habitats that are here.
Yeah.
We're getting more and more coming into the reserve.
Exactly, and that's another point, isn't it? Because the more people come, the more humans intrude on a place that, I think it's an SSI now, isn't it? Special Scientific Interest.
Yeah.
The more it may be threatened, even by somebody who's not meaning to threaten it. How are you going to get over that?
So what we do is we just sort of have places that are set aside for nature. So even when you come to this reserve, you'll find you can't
off
go
limits.
everywhere. Yeah, there's specific parts where you can go, and there's wonderful bird hides which you can go sit in. But those hides, as the name suggests, it sort of keeps that little bit of separation between people and nature.
From talking to Kay and Sarah, it was clear that visitors to the site played a big part in what they do. Lydia Tague is the Visitor Operations Manager for Old Moor and can tell us more about how visitors are attracted to the site and what sort of experience the RSPB hopes to give them.
Well, I think especially over this last 16, 17 months or so, the need for green space and the value of green space has become really obvious to a lot of our visitors. So having this amazing place, this natural place on so many people's doorstep has been a real godsend, I think, for a lot of people. So yeah, I think having this resource for local people is really, really wonderful. But obviously it's not just local people that visit us here at Old Moor. We do get people from across the country, and it is the wildlife spectacle that we have here that really attracts people.
Indeed. Sorry.
No, it's quite all right. From the booming bittern in the spring through to the feeding flights and the juveniles that we see at this time of year in mid and late summer, through to the starling murmurations in the winter months. It really is. It's a wonderful little site in such a urban suburban area. It really is a gem.
I suppose we could say that it's a big place, it's got wonderful things, it's got things that other sort of areas like this haven't got. But how do you go about telling people that you're here?
So the age-old question of marketing, 50% of your marketing budget is effective. The question is which half, So yeah, we use, word of mouth is still the most powerful tool in terms of getting our messaging out there. So of course making sure that the visitor experience is right is a really important part of people telling their friends they should come. But also we do use some traditional routes to media. We, regular media releases that we'll put out to try and entice
the
people in. Yeah, exactly. And of
Been
course,
there, done that myself.
And of course those newer routes to market, things like social media. Facebook is really important for us, and that kind of, and Twitter of course is really important for us as tools to get to new audiences, particularly the family audience.
Yeah, which seems to be important here because we do see a lot of children here, and sometimes for children, however good it might be, 10-15 minutes is enough, isn't it, if it's just birds flying about?
Well, this is it. I think connecting children to nature is one of the RSPBs, and actually a personal passion of mine, but it's one of our really key objectives. We want kids growing up loving nature, and if kids don't have the opportunity to experience nature, then they're not going to grow up loving it, and when it's their turn in charge, they're not going to be making decisions to look after it. So it's really, really important to what we do.
So here's the question: what do you have for them to keep them interested?
Oh gosh, right, okay, where do I start? So from pond dipping, which is a classic, everybody loves pond dipping. At age 38 and a half, I still love going out and pond dipping. It's still my favourite.
You don't look a day over 37.
Thank you. But it's still, it's a real tried and tested activity that everybody loves, and you'd get a lot of people come in because they did it as kids. So that's a real key activity. Regular trails, our new wild play area as well, to really try and mimic some of those childhood experiences that me and you may have had growing up, playing in streams, climbing trees. We're kind of mimicking that with our secret water zone and our tower that you can climb up and get amazing views, because ultimately if you don't grow up experiencing these things, you're not going to care about it as a grown-up.
You've actually worked out one good way of getting children here, because you do a lot of work with schools and societies, don't you?
We do, yeah. So we get somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 school children through every year, and of course we do, as well as those kind of formal school visits, we get a lot of uniformed groups as well, things like Scouts and Brownies, Beavers and Girl Guides, which is it's wonderful. It really is. There's nothing quite like having a group of children come and seeing their face light up when they see something new, or they discover something, or they discover how wonderful nature is. There's nothing quite as rewarding as that.
Balancing visitors across the wildlife, is there a bit of a conflict of interest?
Do you know, we are really lucky here. I know in some areas there can be issues. Here at Old Moor, we're very lucky, I should say. This is a site that we're able to very easily control the visitor flow. We have our path network, which it's incredible actually. Wildlife really quickly learns that people go here, that means that this is the place for me.
This bit is us.
Yeah, and then the people don't come here, so that's fine. So you do see, sometimes you'll see bird nests really close to paths.
Right.
But because they know that the people are there and this is the safe place for them. On some of our satellite sites, there's a bit more of an issue. There can be that kind of abutting of people and nature. Unfortunately, some of our sites we suffer with antisocial behaviour, etc., etc. We're not we're not immune to that. So it is something that we try to manage with things like fencing and ditches and that kind of things. Try to put those physical barriers in place, but you know, it's something we struggle with and we try to manage as best as we can.
One thing that I'd never thought to ask before I came here, but you're wonderfully well equipped for non-ambient people. By that I mean wheelchairs. In fact, you look as if you've got yourself a fleet of wheelchairs here.
So one of the things that is quite an ambition of the RSPB, and I think we at Old Moor, we do it okay. We do it okay, but is to make nature accessible across the piece. So we're lucky we have a few motorised scooters here that we loan out free of charge. We do try, our path network is wide with regular places for people to pause and rest, and our hides we've tried to make sure all the doors are wide enough for buggies, mums and buggies,
Yes.
but also people that do have issues with mobility. Essentially, nature is for everybody, so we try to remove as many of those barriers. If somebody needs to come with a carer, the carer will get free entry, that kind of thing. We're trying. We're not perfect, but we are trying.
Aiming for it. Well, talking about that and aiming for things, what about the future? How positive are you about it? And I'm not going to ask you for ideas because that would be stealing, wouldn't it? But how do you see the future developing?
Well, here at Old Moor, I think we've got a really rosy future. We have just been awarded the SSSI status for the Dearne Valley, which means that a lot of our work and our land is now protected under that. SSSI being Site of Special Scientific Interest.
Does it run in my mind that it helps you get grants too?
It can. The main thing is around the land is protected. It means it's really hard for people to develop and things like that.
You can't suddenly build a big house somewhere in the corner. So, well, it's only at the corner.
Yeah, exactly. But we have been really lucky to have got a very, very generous National Lottery Heritage Fund grant, which means that we're able to develop more of our family offer and also do some quite substantial bits of habitat work that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. So it's only getting better, which means it's better for wildlife and it's better for people. And that for me means that more people can come and experience wildlife here and nature and get that connection and really love where they live, and it means that we'll be attracting more people from outside of the area as well, which is always good for the local economy as well. You know, and because we will be more and more a wildlife destination as well.
Lydia, do you love your job?
I love my job, yeah, I really do. I'm very, very I mean, look at my office, you know. I'm very, very fortunate. I'm paid to do what I love, and I appreciate. I'm in a very fortunate position.
Your hobby becomes your job, and that's a wonderful place to be in, isn't it?
Exactly. You never work a day in your life if your hobby becomes your job. So.
Lydia, it's been great talking to you. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
And take care, and thank you again.
Thanks very much.
This was, not long ago, a huge derelict industrial site. It's now a beacon of wildlife preservation thanks to Barnsley Council and the long-term development work of the RSPB. Emma Tuckey is the site manager, and I asked her what had been achieved here and what the future was likely to be.
Well, it's been a busy couple of years since I've been here with the pandemic, but besides that, the challenges for the site really are just making sure that we've got enough supporters to support what we do and make sure that we've got support throughout into the future, but also that we're financially viable so that we can do the conservation work that we're required to do to make the spectacle and the habitat so wonderful.
Is there anything that might put it in jeopardy?
Absolutely. If we didn't get enough membership supporters, we wouldn't be able to do the conservation work day to day that we do here to make the habitat so wonderful. We've recently become a triple SI nature reserve.
Yes. They're a sort of double-edged sword, aren't they? Because some people absolutely want to embrace them, while other people are saying, no, we don't want that. And suddenly a fight sort of breaks out between two really nice organisations.
Yeah, we definitely support the triple SI here. It will support the work that we do, and it will mean that locally in the valley we'll have better sort of support for like planning applications, making sure nature's factored in, making sure our critical species are supported throughout the valley, not just here at Old Moor.
Right. So, in other words, by being an SSSI, it allows you access to other funding to keep it going.
It definitely does, and it makes our current funding applications stronger because it just means that we're more significant of a nature reserve, so that when we're putting in an ask to funders, we can say we're not just a wetland, we're an internationally important wetland for these birds that come here.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but whenever it is nature, birds, fish, whatever, in the end it boils down to government, both national and local, doesn't it? Do you see any problems? I mean, is your funding safe?
Funding is never safe, unfortunately, but there is some funding coming through from the government about the Green Recovery Fund, which the RSPB is accessing, which is a huge help in our sector. But the lack of kind of EU funding is a risk, and we are worried about it. Locally, we've got setups where we've got our kind of the business side of the setup here, the cafe and the shop and the membership, which will help us be financially viable here at Old Moor, but we need support wider than that. It's not just RSPB, that's the whole conservation sector.
Yeah, I seem to be very doom-laden with this, but what's climate change mean to you? You see, I see all these wonderful British plants, if I can call them that. Are they going to be in danger? I mean, if they'll burn quite well in other countries, I should imagine they'll burn here. Could you see us losing it?
Yeah, there's definitely a risk due to climate change. I think one of the most realistic elements for us is increased likelihood of flooding in the valley, and most of our Dearne Valley sites are flooded areas. They're designed to flood, they're designed to hold water back from the river catchment to protect housing downstreams, but the more that happens, the more our wetlands are underwater and the more they're impacted long term, but that's the balance that we have to make here.
I notice you've got feeding boxes for certainly some of the birds. Is that deliberate policy so that the birds will come down while you have people here?
Yeah, it's part of our kind of spectacle. So if we draw the birds into our feeders, it means that the visitors have a really good experience when they're here, and they can get closer to nature and understand more about the reserve here. So they can see that we have bullfinches and tree sparrows and all sorts of different things that they might not see without those feeders bringing them a bit closer to the viewers, the visitors, and then they can understand better why we're here, why we're making these conservation asks and asking for membership supporters, because they can see the wildlife in front of them as we brought them closer to those birds.
Finally though, are you enjoying your job and how much?
I really am enjoying the job. The site here is just beautiful. And the team is fantastic, and it's a real pleasure to come to work every day.
Oh, that's nice to hear. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, that was Emma Tuckey, the site manager here at Old Moor. Now the final person to talk to on my visit is Spike Mayston, who is a visitor experience manager at Old Moor. Spike, you've been making quite a few changes around here recently, haven't you? In fact, since last I came here, there's a new footpath.
There's a new footpath, there's new visitor facilities, there's more importantly, some of the habitat improvements are all happening now.
Yeah. Why a footpath in particular? Was it something that was needed, or something just to put the icing on the cake?
Well, we've known for a long time that at RSPB Old Moor, we've been quite reliant on hides, where the visitor has an opportunity to see some of the wildlife. But they are, with the new footpath, this offers a really good sort of like panoramic view over some of the the
Great,
wetlands
yeah.
here at RSPB Moor. Yeah.
Which a lot of people who come here would really appreciate, wouldn't they?
Yeah, and it's really been highlighted how hide reliant we have been through COVID. In fact, so during COVID, at the back end of COVID, we opened up our doors to our visitors. Of course, they've got nowhere to go because the restriction of that tough,
yeah.
they couldn't use the hides. So the new footpath is a welcomed addition to the reserve.
Yeah. It's been successful in bringing visitors in, and when I say visitors, I don't mean the humankind. I mean the feathered and swimming and flying type.
Absolutely, yeah. We got this Dearne Valley is really, really important throughout the year. So one, it's a migratory stop-off point. Two, we have birds that overwinter here, and we still got some birds like teal and widgeon that are still here at the moment. This side, where we are, the third weekend of March.
Yeah.
And of course we have breeding here. Some of the habitat improvement works here is to sort of like increase the productivity of birds, and by that I mean bums on eggs.
Yes.
Okay. So a large part of the reserve here is being converted from what we call wet grasslands to wader scrape to improve that.
Next point I was coming to, you've got a new scrape, haven't you?
Yeah, well, it's not quite completed yet. The vast majority of the footpath is open now, but the actual the wader scrape isn't quite ready yet because we've had to sort of like stop because of breeding season. It's critical that we don't interrupt that.
Yes, they like privacy, don't they?
They like privacy, yeah, and wildlife has a tendency, once it's disturbed, to go, and it's very difficult to get it back. So we're very sensitive.
I'm interested in the birds that sort of lodge here temporarily on the way from A to B. They stop here and then fly on.
Yeah. So we've, migrate. The UK is a hub when it comes to sort of like migration. It's massively important. There's migrations from, Europe, but also migrations from Siberia, those regions, and of course, we still get the odds. Even where we are now, migratory birds that perhaps come over from the Atlantic. So it's extremely important. I mean, some of the common ones would be the wintering birds like teal and widgeon. Where they come here to overwinter and feed on seed heads and
this
things
is
like
their
that.
destination.
That's right, in the winter. Then they go off to other parts of of the world to breed. And at the same time we have birds that come here during the summer, to breed. So our sister reserve over at Addick there, and there's last year there's something like 18 breeding pairs of avocets. And I don't know if you can see, but the RSPB logo there, that's an avocet. I think there's like 3 breeding pairs at Old Moor last year, and some of the habitat improvement works will go even beyond these breeding numbers to get more breeding avocet here, more breeding redshank here. So yes, it's good.
Do you think you might get so successful that you have a conflict of interest? When I say conflict of interest, will you start banning foxes?
Well,
and if so, I don't know what fox language there is to say, please don't come in here.
That's a difficult thing to ban foxes, but what we do is we do put systems in place to prevent disturbance by foxes, and we call it predator fencing. It does what it says on the tin.
And then with the water, there's weasels.
And with the ditch, and and so there are systems in place to prevent that type of predation. But no, I mean, we try and sort of like counter any sort of like effect. Yeah, so we've got some great news, recent news in the Dearne Valley, especially here at our RSPB Moor. otters are back, you know, after a long time of not being in our river systems.
What a
'cause of-
success!
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We're all thrilled to bits here in the Dearne Valley. So there's been one or two sort of like indications, over the last couple of years that they may sort of like be looking to come back in this neck of the woods.
Family groups and breeding again.
It certainly looks that way, yeah. So it's not, we can't quite confirm it yet, but it's likely that we may have a female in last year's pup. So yeah, we're all excited here, and it's testimony to the health of the river systems, the Environment Agency and places like this in the Dearne Valley, some of the habitat restoration.
I hope that Spike Maston's project goes well and provides an extra area for the wildlife and an extra interest for visitors. The Dearne Valley is a great success story of renewal and nature conservation, and a truly great place to visit for all ages. Together with all the people who work to support them, Old Moor and the other sites contribute to the richness of the environment and our well-being. Most have been magically created out of the decay and dereliction, and they remind us that the planet Earth is infinitely renewable, if human beings would like to give it a chance.